Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me? Welcome to a bit of a special episode of the Can You Hear Me podcast, our podcast giving voice to the diverse talent working to improve health and care for people in West Yorkshire and Harrogate, and presented by members of the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership's Race Equality Network. The episode was actually recorded last year, so we're delighted to now be able to share it with you. Sincere thanks to the guests on this episode, and our host, Sal Uka, Clinical Lead for the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts. Please be prepared for some highly emotional, personal testimony in this episode. Thank you.
Here with me today are three really amazing colleagues, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Alison Lowe. I'm the Chief Exec of Touchstone Mental Health and Wellbeing Charity based in West Yorkshire.
Hi there, my name's Steve. I am currently Chief Exec at Harrogate and District Foundation Trust and have been here for about a year and a half, but in the NHS for about 22 years.
Hi, I'm Wasim Feroze. I am a policy officer in the Chief Exec's office at Leeds City Council, and I am the chair of Leeds City Council's BAME staff network since 2018.
Thank you all, and I'll say so. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today, kind of coordinating this conversation. So, hello, my name is Sal Uka. I am the medical lead at Wyatt, and today we're going to be touching upon something which is close to my own heart as well. It has to be said. We're going to be looking at the crossover between what it feels like to be BAME, but also lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or queer. And I've said those words intentionally. If we kind of kick off with some simple facts. So at the moment, 34% of the UK workforce choose not to disclose their sexuality at work. And this might be because they're worried about homophobia or they're worried about being overlooked for kind of promotions. My first question is, how does that feel to you? Why might that be the case? And what do you think we can do about it as employees and people that work within West Yorkshire and Harrogate? Alison.
I think that we've got to learn to be much better allies and create safe spaces for all our colleagues to work within. People will not come out at work if their working environment is not safe. So how we talk to each other, how we train our colleagues about what's acceptable in the workplace, but also understanding the very many cultures and differences that exist in the LGBTQ community, but also BAME, disabled communities, because you can be intersectional, any one of those things, and all those things together. And I think it's really important that we do the training, we create the culture, we are respectful, and we are allies. And if we did all those things, if all of us did all those things, that 34% would be much, much higher. And maybe we'd even get to 100% on a really good day.
Can I add to what Alison's just said, Sal? I was thinking about this in terms of my own experience. So I've been out, as it were, since about 1998. But I was only out to a very, very small number of people. And I started in the NHS in 97-ish. It was probably about 12, 13, 14 years later that I even started to talk about being gay at work. I was trying to think about why that might be. And as you say, all of us have got differences. There was one difference I had that I couldn't hide, it's quite obvious. But I hid being gay at work for quite a long time. And as Alison says, I think we've got to have an environment in which people talk about difference and talk about them being different and their experiences, because it makes it feel okay. And although I was effectively technically I was in a senior management position, I didn't feel comfortable talking about lots of stuff in my personal life. I didn't feel comfortable saying that my partner was a man. And part of that was about who I saw in the organisations, or what I thought about who I saw in the organisations. I didn't see people that I felt looked like me or were like me. So I thought I was scared, basically. And one of the things that I learned looking back is quite a lot of that actually was also about me, because when I did start to talk about it, everyone was fine. In fact, everyone said, well, of course we know. And everyone was very supportive and very friendly and welcoming at work. That hasn't always been the case in life, but at work. And I kind of had to challenge myself a little bit to think, why did I assume that people might not be okay about this? So I think having an environment in which we talk about difference, whether it's BAME, LGBTQ+, disability, whatever, to normalise it is really, really important.
Thanks, Steve. And I think you made a really interesting point, didn't you, about there's one thing that's really obvious. So, for people listening, Steve, like myself, like all of us here are from a BAME background, and actually you can't hide that, can you? But interestingly, sexuality is perhaps something you have a choice on. Wasim, what do you think? Should we be doing more so that people feel more comfortable about bringing their true selves to work?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what everyone has said. I think creating environments where people have a safe space to be themselves is so critical, and particularly, just around all protected characteristic groups. And I think, when organizations talk about being truly inclusive and truly diverse, that for me is what it's about. It's about allowing individuals within your organization to bring their whole selves to work. And it's something that Steve said, which I think is really important. The visibility of role models within organizations are so critical. And, it's not going to be the silver bullet, but I do believe if you can see it, you can be it. And if you see more role models like yourself that you can relate to, I do think that has an impact in the way people as individuals, feel comfortable within an organization. So, but I do think it needs to go further, if I can say that. I think, people need to see different types of role models. So they don't just need to see those who are perhaps more overt and career driven, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there are also other role models within organizations who are perhaps, slightly more introvert, but also feel, don't necessarily want to progress any further, don't want to be in a senior position, but are comfortable sharing who they are. And I think the importance of leadership is your kind of job role doesn't define the fact that you're a leader. You can have leaders at every level in the organization. And I think it's critical that we allow people to be themselves at every level. So these conversations are not just happening at the top, they're happening every part of the organization.
I completely agree. But can you feel that for some people, the risk is just too great? And so actually, like I say, you don't have a choice with the colour of your skin, but you do have a choice when it comes to disclosing your sexual orientation or your sexuality. So, is it a gamble? What's in it for people to kind of out themselves?
Yeah, I think it is a gamble because the facts are that as people of colour, I'm not gay, but both my kids are. They're obviously people of colour. It is a fact that in the LGBT community, racism is rife. I think Stonewall did a report in 2018 that said if you're a BAME person who is gay, that 51% of people have said, out of 5,000 people questioned, 51% said they've faced discrimination in the LGBT community. And for Black gay people, this had gone up to 61%. So actually, it's a real risk to be out because of the racism you experience from your own LGBT community. But also, the risk of not coming out is that your mental health is affected, your ability to be authentic and be yourself is also a factor. So I think that you're in a bit of a lost situation, whichever one you choose.
So we've touched upon some of the Stonewall kind of publications, and Stonewall obviously a bastion for LGBT communities. And obviously there's lots of publications there, but obviously, you know, there's some research behind some of this. So how do we take it from being something that we can have a discussion about to something that feels real? What do we need to do?
I think Black Lives Matter and the tragic death of George Floyd gives us a huge opportunity, not just in the heterosexual community, but within the LGBT community, to really begin the anti-racism campaign and challenge. I think that a lot of people are now questioning their white privilege. I think a lot of people are questioning a structural system which is absolutely palpably racist and treats people of colour differently. So I hope that this is an opportunity, not just for all of us, but for those people in the LGBT community who are also being to be able to challenge, push back, and have the door open from those people who are recognising that they've been part of the problem.
So yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, and Steve touched on it earlier as well in terms of sharing his experience. It's not an easy subject to talk about, you know, and it's such a complex subject. You know, if I talk about my own experience as an ethnic minority and a gay man, you know, I have not gone through that. I don't think I've gone through that moment of coming out that others have, and you know, because it is so complex. You've kind of played different roles depending on what setting you're in. So if I share my kind of experience, you know, when I go back home, I'm very different to how I am here in Leeds. I live with my partner here in Leeds. I can be open about my sexuality. But when I go back home, you know, and I'm sure every South Asian person has experienced this, that, you know, they will have an auntie who asks, when are you going to get married? And they certainly don't mean, when are you going to get married to a man? And I think that comes with you, whatever setting you're in, and you take the experiences that you've had previously of discrimination, of, you know, hearing those really homophobic comments in the past, and you take those with you through your kind of life, and that, you know, your working life you don't escape that world in your working life. It's brought with you, and people, you know, you feel that constant pressure of repressing a key part of your identity, and that impacts the way you are at work. So that's why I think it's so crucial that we need to have those open, honest conversations. We need to accept that those conversations are going to be very difficult. They're going to be very uncomfortable, but we all need to understand how we feel, how we truly feel. And once we've done that, I think we can start having conversations about how we're going to address this. You know, how can we make the workplace a safe space for you where you can be your authentic self? And it's a combination of the things that have already been mentioned, but also like role models, also, you know, creating those key places, which is what we're trying to do at the council. But I know organisations across, you know, the country are trying to do that, where we allow staff to just share their experiences. And I think that's the key.
Steve, do you want to?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with Wasim about that. And when we talk about safe spaces, there's a temptation to think about we have to create a small network that hides away in a cupboard, that meets once a month and shuts the curtains, turns the lights out, and has a conversation about what life's like. The safe space that we need to create is the organisation as a whole, and that is about, as everyone has said, a willingness and an openness to simply accept that people are different, and that different can be almost anything. It doesn't matter whether it's BAME, it doesn't matter whether it's LGBTQ plus, or it can be so many different things. So it's as much about bringing some of the positive societal changes that we've seen into work, and making sure that we don't bring in some of the negative societal changes that we have also seen. And although, again, I've only really been comfortable talking about my partner and where I'm from and so on in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's taken a really long time, and many people will probably say, well, you seem quite bolshy, but it is really different. And I think Wasim's point about helping people to understand that, but also for us to accept that it's really difficult for people to have this conversation with us. And that's not to say it's our responsibility or anything like that, but we have to recognise that people might also find it really difficult, even though they desperately want to. I think that whilst it's not the be all and end all, symbolism is really important because it creates an opportunity to talk. So the rainbow badge movement, apart from the fact I really love the badge because it's just very cool, created an opportunity, certainly in the organisations I was in, for us to have a completely different conversation. And it opened up so many more people being comfortable to talk about their own personal circumstances and be themselves at work. I can't remember if it was Alison or Wasim that said it, but it's just so much happier if you can be yourself at work, and it's much better for the people that you lead and work with. Because the days you can bring your true self to work are the days that everybody has a good day.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? The podcast from the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership.
Hello, can you hear me?
Let's just look at it from a slightly different perspective, which is we know homophobia exists. We know racism exists. And clearly there will be people that, that come into either health and or care settings, or that come into contact with colleagues who are either from a health or a care perspective, who actually see, really see racism living out there or homophobia living out there as well. What would you say to them?
I think ultimately we've got to love ourselves first as people of colour, as LGBT people. Anyone who's different, you have to love yourself first, and then you'll have the strength to be able to stand up to those people who don't maybe love us as much as we love ourselves. I think it's really important to have the head and heart argument. So when we introduced a lot of changes to Touchstone, which led us to being in the Stonewall Top 100 for the last 7 years, that took a lot of information, training, but also the knowledge that we were working in a mental health setting with people whose mental health was massively adversely impacted by homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. And as an organisation, if we were seriously going to be addressing the health inequalities and the unfair treatment that many people we serve are facing, we had to be better at understanding the issues facing LGBTQ people, embrace those issues, find out how we could be supportive and allies. And if we didn't do that, then why were we there? So I think it's about finding out about the communities that you're serving those communities to the best of your ability by, really educating yourself, being a person who loves yourself, but also has got the capacity to love others by being open, transparent, authentic, all those things. And basically, if you meet people who continue to be haters, you do something about it, you follow your processes, you route to bullying, harassment, all those things, and hopefully love will win.
Thank you, Alison. So, and you've mentioned, didn't there, really? So there will be people who see racism, who see and hear homophobia, or they may even have it targeted to them. Steve, what should they do? What advice can you give, would you say?
So this is dead easy to say, and it's really hard to do. But somebody, it's not my phrase, it's somebody much wiser. But most people who witness it, they will feel as uncomfortable about it, or nearly as uncomfortable about it, as the person who is the recipient of it, and they'll feel helpless and probably appalled in many cases. But the easiest thing to do, right, is to look the other way. But there's someone uses this phrase that I think is really quite important, and she says, "What you put up with, you promote." So it's as I say, it's really, really easy to say that. But if you observe it and you put up with it, then you are promoting it. You are saying that this is okay. You are saying, I think this is a good way to treat somebody. It's acceptable around here. And challenging that sort of stuff in the moment, the hardest thing possible, which is why we have to create the environment in which people feel safe to do that. But that's what we have to do, and always that guiding point of if you let it happen, you are saying this is a good thing.
I think that's a really powerful statement, Stephen. I think actually the tagline there that you've shared perhaps ought to feature more prominently across all areas of discrimination. Wasim, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said, and you might see that a common theme throughout this discussion is about creating the safe spaces, because it's so critical, and I think it applies to every sort of form, so homophobia, any form of discrimination, racism, etc. It's crucial that the organisation has, those effective processes and policies in place to challenge poor behaviour within the workplace, and a lot of that is not just about policy and process, it's also about culture of the organisation and achieving that positive cultural shift where everyone in the organisation, whether they're experiencing it or witnessing it, can challenge those behaviours. And I think there's another part of this conversation, isn't it? There's that clear, definitive kind of where people are being racist and homophobic is challenged and it's dealt with appropriately. But there's also an element where people might have serious questions, an interest in the area. And I guess it's trying to understand where their questions are coming from. I don't mind asking a question about my sexuality if it's a genuine interest in learning about kind of my experiences. If it's just, kind of a superficial interest, I'm not really going to invest my time speaking to that person about my kind of experiences. So I think, there is a complex picture at work. We need to be clear about challenging poor behaviours and dealing with that effectively. But we also, again, need to create those safe spaces where we can have those conversations and people, who have genuine interests, we can engage with them.
Thanks, Wasim. So you've all created a very powerful argument for the need of safe spaces. And I think that's really important. Let me just ask you, whilst we're still talking about sexuality in the workplace, have you ever experienced anything negative about your sexuality? And what if anything, what did you do, or how did it feel?
Yeah, so I don't think I've at least explicitly to me experienced any sort of homophobia within the workplace. But what I would say is that there are certain experiences outside of the workplace that kind of, as I said before, define kind of how I behave and how I kind of respond. And I think there are points where you don't necessarily need to face homophobia directly for it to impact you. You need to sometimes hear the conversations around you that are happening. So in my kind of, I certainly, I'm not saying I lived in a household which was extremely conservative, was really kind of heavily religious. I wasn't, I'll be honest about that. But there were points in my life where I was very religious, but that was, and I'm kind of looking back, I think I used religion as a way to kind of distract from that other part of me that I didn't want anyone to know about, and it was the sexuality part. And I thought that might be a way of me finding my place somewhere. But you know what? I found out that actually I didn't find my true self there. I couldn't be my true self there. And I think those different experiences of, hearing homophobia, stay with you, build up, you almost face, there's times in your kind of life where you repress your identity, parts of your identity. And I think this brings us on to kind of an interesting conversation about intersectionality, doesn't it? It kind of, I think we frame, and I kind of want to challenge some notions of how we frame the conversations about intersectionality. I think they're very much defined, and we've got used to and accustomed to defining intersectionality as conflicts of identities and not seeing them as ways to complement each other. So the fact that I am BAME is part of my identity, but it's not the only part of my identity. I'm part of the LGBT plus community as well, and that's part of my identity too. one part of my identity doesn't define me. There might be points in my life where actually being BAME is more prominent, is more of a barrier, is highlighted as an issue, and this certainly was. But there's also parts of my life where sexuality became more prominent. So I do really think we need to talk about intersectionality as not just a conflict of identities that can coexist. They need to complement each other. That's the way we can only kind of find our true, authentic, whole selves, and not, kind of a half of ourselves or a third of ourselves.
I totally agree with that. And I've often said that intersectionality in itself has become a bit of a problem because it implies deficit, it implies problem, so it problematizes our different protected characteristics. So is my problem that I'm black, or is my problem that I'm a woman? Is my problem that the kids are gay? At the end of the day, all those things are joys to me. They make me who I am, and I'm incredibly lucky to be that combination of difference that makes me me. So I think we need to have a conversation about the way that intersectionality is framed, the way that it's been hijacked, and we've got to have a new understanding that intersectionality is positive, it's good, it makes us special, and it's something that we need to celebrate.
Well said. Really well said. Both of you. Steve, did you want to come in on this notion of intersectionality? I'll try that again. Come in on the notion of intersectionality.
I think Alison and Wasim have said it way more eloquently than I could ever venture, to be honest. But you do sometimes, when you experience different treatment, you sometimes do end up thinking, so is that different treatment because of A, B, or C? And actually, do you know what? We shouldn't even have to have that conversation. Kind of going back to the earlier discussion, I think I've probably experienced more racism in my life than I have homophobia. That might be because I wasn't open about being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, whereas it was quite obvious I was from a BAME background. I haven't necessarily had homophobia at work directly, but indirectly, I suppose. So two things. This is a poor example of intersectionality, right? But when I started at HDFT, my picture got sent round, as it always does, really, when someone else starts. And I got told by some colleagues that when that happened, quite a few people said, well, he doesn't look like a Steve. And then at Christmas, I just sent a note around everybody to kind of say Happy Christmas and da-di-da-di-da. And I put in it, I would be in the trust on Christmas morning, spending a bit of time with teams, but then was spending the afternoon at home with Martin and my parents. Again, somebody had said to me, oh, you should have heard the conversation in the workshop when that email went round. And so nobody was directly homophobic towards me, but do I feel that that was homophobic? Yes. And did it impact on me? Yes. Did it make me question some of the narrative I was trying in the organisation? Yes. Did I feel bad? Yes. All of the above. So it's not necessarily a very sophisticated intersectionality point, but I kind of go back to what a few of us have said. You can overcomplicate this. This is about treating people as people, whatever their makeup, experience, background, etc. The more we focus on that, the better.
But I also think, Steve, and you do look like a Steve to me, that we need to create the conditions where that member of staff who told you that story also felt able to challenge those people in that workshop and say, what the hell are you on about? Because what you're saying is racist, homophobic, etc., etc. And when that happens, some idiot says it and 20 people jump on that person and say, what are you bloody on about? That's when we know we're in a safe space.
I think that's key. And if I can come in here as well, I think Steve also touched on an aspect that we often talk about in terms of ethnicity, but also there's microaggressions at play, and there's that subtle racial discrimination in your everyday experience at work, and stuff like oh, you're articulate, you're an articulate person, and that's surprising, or the fact that you're BAME and LGBT, you obviously have had an oppressed experience in your life because you're from a BAME background and you are LGBT, and I think there's all sorts of assumptions made in a kind of your everyday working life. But again, it comes down to, doesn't it, kind of challenging that behavior, but sorry to say it again, creating the safe spaces for people to have these discussions.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello, can
You're
you hear me?
listening to Can You Hear Me? A podcast from the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership.
Hello,
Health and Care
can you hear me?
Wasim, earlier on, you talked about your experiences of your religion and being both BAME and LGBT. Do you want to kind of build on what that feels like now and perhaps kind of reflecting on that difficulty sometimes between religion and sexual orientation?
Yeah, happy to. So as I said before, I think there is. I think if we're being honest, there is a tension. There is clearly a tension, and I don't think we'll have an honest conversation if people don't accept that from the outset. But what I would say is that those barriers can be overcome, and I think slowly, my own experience, we're getting there. So. And this is my own personal experience, and I think we can achieve that more widely. So when I was kind of younger, as I said before, I used religion as a way of kind of trying to find a place. Religion is so important when you're young, because my kind of experience was after I finished school, I would have 2 hours lessons to learn the Quran after I kind of think, and I never understood a word of Arabic. I never understood anything about the Quran, but I did that every day for years and years, and it becomes part of you, because I think what people see is religion as it's not simply just a religion; it's a way of life. It impacts every aspect of your life. There's something for every aspect of your life, and that's kind of taken with me, and there has been conflict. I realized that I was gay from a very young age. I repressed it, if I'm being honest, for a very long time. If I'm being honest, and I'm sure people knew. I'm sure my mother knew, particularly because I was very close with her. But it was, I never said it, and as I say right now, I've not actually had conversations with family members about my sexuality. There are a certain small group similar to Steve who know the kind of my sexuality. They know I've got a partner, but there are certain aspects of my experience from when I was younger, that have improved. So I'm more open about my sexuality in certain settings. But then I also continue to see that repression, if I'm being honest there. There are moments, and I often self-reflect. And when I do things like this, I self-reflect. There are moments in my time where I do repress my sexuality. So going back home to a wedding, I go without my partner. That's a reality. I can't go to a wedding with my partner because it'll confirm my sexuality. And there's a fear there in me that, I just want to say I'm proud of who I am, but it's extremely difficult to confront that with the people that you love, your family members. And I don't want them to see me differently purely because I am gay. But the fact of the matter is that I'm sure some of them will. And some of them who are most closest to me will react negatively. But, there are moments in my life where, and I don't want to sound cringe here, but love does overcome. And, there are people who accept who I am, who I've been close to for a very long time, people, but that's taken time. And I'm sure they haven't fully accepted it because they've not verbalized it to me. But, this is really kind of, I guess it's a message to people out there who are going through this, that, those moments where people are not judging you purely because you may go out with a man or you're in the same sex. They're judging you for who you are. They're having a conversation with you because of your whole self. They're not judging you purely because you kind of, you're in a homosexual relationship. And it matters, talk to each other. Don't I've been guilty of this where I've kind of just, and I still do it, I still stop talking about the issue. I stop myself from opening up about my relationship. And it doesn't just impact me. I have such a huge guilt that the impact on my partner. This is why this area is so complex. You can have a combination of feeling extremely proud of your identity, but then there are moments in your life where you chip away at your true identity, and then you lose a sense of yourself within that. And it's so critical that, that's why I'm saying in some places, for some people, the workplace might be the only safe space where they can actually be their true selves. That's why it's so critical for organizations to be so on top of this agenda, because they can create spaces where people can be that there's out 6 hours in the day where they can feel that they can be themselves. They can talk about their partners, and I do the same with my colleagues at work. But then when I go somewhere else, when I go back home, it's very different, and it has an impact. And and when you're doing that over decades, when you're doing that, I've nearly been with my partner for a decade, and it is extremely hard to have a conversation because the amount of guilt that I face that he has not been able to have really know my parents, really know my family, really know who I am, the people who brought me up, well. But I just can't. Confronting the issue is so difficult. It's such an emotional subject. And, I think part of it is cultural, maybe. We often, as particularly in my kind of culture, South Asian culture, men don't talk about their feelings. It's very difficult to actually, discuss any issue. You really just hide things. You continue to repress them, whatever it might be, and add sexuality into the mix, and it becomes, a really emotive subject. And you know what? My father, if I told him, might not react negatively, but it's the fear of him reacting negatively and rejecting me that really stops me. And, I'm doing this because I'm doing this podcast because I know others are feeling exactly the same way as I do. I'm a 30-year-old man, but I'm going through these issues. I'm not fully out. And there's lots of people out there who are experiencing exactly the same thing. And that's why I think we need to start having these open, honest conversations publicly like this, having people like Alison, Steve, and myself, doing these discussions to let people know that we hear you, we're experiencing the same things as you, and there are people out there who can support you.
Wasim, what you just said is incredibly powerful and incredibly brave. And I think I just want to take a moment to say thank you, because actually, what you've just shared with us there was from the heart, and really, really touching. And I'm sure anyone who is listening to this podcast at this moment in time will just want to kind of give you the massive hug and say thank you for being so honest and open.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? The podcast from the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Steve, you were nodding quite a bit there, and do you want to kind of come in?
I guess so. I think Wasim's narrative story from the heart is it's really emotional. It'd be bad to cry on the screen, right? So, but my experience is slightly different, but it reminds me of so this is really difficult. I really struggle with this. So I'm adopted. My parents are white. My brother is from a white background. I grew up in a very white area. I was the only, there's two non-white children in the school I went to. I probably knew at primary school that I was gay, but I was concentrating on having a different look about me at that time. And I remember that when I did start to talk about being gay, people said to me, "Oh, that must be really difficult for you because of your parents." I didn't know my parents. And I'm pretty sure that they said that my parents were wonderful. They are wonderful. They always have been. I'm pretty sure they said that because they made an assumption about who my parents were what background my parents were from and what people from that background might think. And that's just unfair, because there are lots of people from a BME background who are incredibly supportive of LGBTQ plus rights and all other aspects. The reason I find this in some ways really difficult is there are also some people who are not, and I, like others, are really passionate about race equality for all the reasons that will be really obvious. And there's something that I find really, I just find it difficult, and maybe maybe others wouldn't, but so I'm not religious, but my partner's parents are, and they have always been loving and wonderful to me. Martin's dad acted as a minister in the church, and they're very committed to the church and do all sorts of wonderful things for the community. I know we couldn't get married in his parents' church. And the reason we couldn't get married in his parents' church is because there's quite a significant proportion of the church who are from a community that don't feel that being LGBTQ plus is right, and it's very democratic in the church and all the rest of it, and they've talked about LGBTQ stuff quite a lot in the years recently, but what I think I probably observe is a position that is going the way I would not like it to go, rather than towards the way I would like it to go. I find it really difficult, because I believe firmly in their rights as people from a BME background, but I'm really challenged by the fact that they don't think that the bit of me that is LGBTQ plus is okay. And I don't know what the answer to it is, but I really, really struggle with that dichotomy.
I think we might have to put this podcast out with a warning to say keep your tissues at hand, because actually, Steve, that just unbelievable. Thank you again. I mean, I think Fatima better do this next time, because I wasn't quite so prepared. Right. I mean, it seems as if no matter how far equality gets with relation to being lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, whatever label that you identify with, there are some real sort of issues when it comes to kind of religion, and when it comes to kind of culture and some of the kind of prejudices or some of the assumptions. Alison, what can we do?
Well, first of all, in response to what's just been said, I am a mother, and I'm the mother of 2 gay children, and my son came out at 14, although I always knew that he was gay, always. And I love my children. It's deep, it's visceral, and irrespective of who my children are, I love them, love them, love them. And I will fight to the end, fight to the death for the right of my children to love who they want to love. And I think it's really important that we as parents of LGBT plus children come together and show the world that it is possible to be a loving parent and an accepting parent. My children have thrived as a result of that love and care. But my family, my parents, my dad was from the Caribbean, and he really struggled with, first of all, my son being gay, my daughter's bi. She's always been bi, so she didn't really ever come out because she was just who she was. But my dad really struggled with my son being a gay man from the Caribbean. But Wasim is right, love does win out, because it was amazing how suddenly it looked like he just forgot. He forgot, and he remembered that he loved Adam. And once he loved Adam, he didn't stop loving Adam, and his sexual orientation became an irrelevance. It was an important thing for Adam. It's not that he forgot it because it was a nasty thing. He forgot it because his love was more important. And I think as people, whether we are LGBT plus, whether we are parents of children who are LGBT plus, we have a duty to create a space that is fair, that is equal, where justice is the name of the game, and we stand up and we are never bystanders, and we make it possible, because often these parents will be saying to their children, don't come here if you're gay. It's because they're worried about what their friends are going to say, what their community is going to say. And if we create a space that is actually so loving and positive and inclusive, They won't be scared of what their friends and family are going to say, because they'll know that their friends and family are as inclusive as they are. So let's include, and then everyone will be inclusive.
If we were to kind of then think, well, okay, we've got lessons learned. So, for those who are listening, Stonewall started from the riots that occurred. And on the back of that, over time, there have been cultural movements towards being more honest and open about discussing sexuality and sexual orientation. Here we are at the moment experiencing the real in the moment time of Black Lives Matter. How can we make sure that actually what we're talking about is just our community or our communities, rather than having LGBT over here and BAME over there? What can we do? Steve?
I don't know is the honest answer, Sal. What I know, I suppose, is there are moments in history that we all remember. So we currently remember George Floyd. When I was growing up, we remembered Stephen Lawrence. But the outrage around Stephen Lawrence didn't translate into sustained change because we've got George Floyd. And you're right, the Stonewall riots were, many years ago. And there's been progress, right? But not enough. So I don't know what the answer is, but we have to make sure the conversation doesn't fizzle, and the passion, and I suppose the passion inspired by a bit of outrage doesn't fizzle. There's a real risk that we normalise down rather than progress up, I suppose. And listening to Alison and talking about responsibilities as a parent, we've all got, no matter what background we come from, we all have a responsibility to not just keep the conversation going, because it has to lead to doing things differently. But unless the conversation keeps going and it remains prominent in our psyche, then the action will also fizzle and die. So we have to, in the NHS, we are great at talking about speaking up. And we sometimes think about that as whistleblowing or patient safety. This is about safety for people. And so we've got to carry on speaking up and out, loud and proud, about all of these issues together. I now look at two films that are my favourite films in a completely different way. So my two favourite films are Hidden Figures and Pride. And they tell an incredibly important story. They create an incredibly important message about who needs to be talking about these issues and who needs to be acting. Who would ever have thought it was the miners that would have changed gay rights in the way that they did? And the point on Hidden Figures, those brilliant BAME women who were overlooked, who assumptions were made, who put the man on the moon.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Can you hear me?
To Can You Hear Me? A podcast from the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Alison, earlier on you talked about allies. What would you say to people that are listening who either don't identify as being LGBTQ plus or who are not of a BME background? What role do they play?
They play a critical role, because even though I don't need white people to help me succeed in this world, I want them to be beside me as my allies, working with me to make this a better world for everybody. And I think that it's so important that we talk to people out there about our lived experience, about what it feels like to be treated differently because of our gender or sexual orientation or race or ethnicity or religion, and how that's not fair, and let them help us create a better, safer world, because we've all got to be angry about what's happening in this world. This world is not a fair place, and it's never been a fair place, and it probably never will. But if we can reduce those inequalities and make it unacceptable for Black people to be spoken to with the N-word, or for Islamophobia to be so allowed, it's just permitted. If we create a space where none of that stuff is allowed to happen, then we're all of us contributing to a better world. And so that's what we have to do. And allies, we need you with us. But please don't feel offended when we say that you've got white privilege, because you have got white privilege. Understand what that means. Act to be anti-racist, act to be anti-fascist, and be part of the solution, because you can.
Thank you, Alison. Wasim, what do you when you are at work, what do you expect from people who are in leadership posts, be it either they are of a BME background or who may identify with LGBTQ+, or who are neither?
I think it's similar to what Steve and Alison have said. It's about not just listening and saying things. It's about doing things too. It's about taking action. And people often talk about this COVID context as a new normal. Well, I've heard before, and I've heard from, I can't remember who it was who said this, but this is very much the same normal for many groups in society. And I include the BAME and LGBT groups within that. They're still facing the same discrimination. There's still the wider equality issues, and they manifest themselves in different ways, whether that's within the workplace or society. Now, we're all on this struggle together, but as Alison said, we need to have these open, honest conversations with each other. We need to understand where we're coming from, and there might be conversation, and this is what we're trying to do at the council: create safe spaces where we can have these conversations and certainly talk about allyship. And I think people are really looking at what they want from allies within the current context. There will be certain people who are really interested and want to support BAME groups and LGBT groups, but they need a space to kickstart that conversation, because part of it is that actually, we talk about creating safe spaces for BAME and LGBT groups, but we also need to create spaces for allies to have conversations. And yes, they might say something that's really uncomfortable and actually offensive, but they need to know that they will not be, immediately reprimanded for saying something that they didn't intend for it to be negative. And it's only when we understand each other, truly understand each other, and be honest with each other, that together we can go on that journey together to improve the organisation. And that doesn't, as I said before, we often, leadership is important, and having leaders back your agenda is extremely important, especially in an organisation, and really penetrating that culture that you need to change. But change can only be achieved if it's happening at every levels of the organisation, and those conversations can't just happen at the top. They need to happen at every level. And I think people really want to have these conversations. I can't tell you in terms of the current context how many non-BAME colleagues within the council have said, look, we want to do more, we want to have these conversations, how do we do this? And that's really positive. That's such a positive sign that finally we're having the conversations. Finally, we're looking not just externally, but internally within our organisation about how we can improve practices, policy, culture, and importantly, improve the experience of our BAME staff within the organisations. And that, along with that journey, there's others that are coming with us. I'm having conversations with our LGBT staff network chairs, disability networks, carers networks. They're all having these conversations because we all are on this journey together. So let's start talking to each other. Let's just start talking, and we will find a way. And, as I said, it's not just leaders, it's everyone. Everyone. Diversity and inclusion has to matter to everyone. It has to be part of your every day.
And I'd just like to add on that, I think we need to be vigilant as well, because as much as we think we're making gains, I love those films too, Steve, but actually there is now a real threat to the trans community, and we need to make sure LGB is also with the T. And if we don't keep the gains we've made, then they will mean for nothing. So please, all those LGB people out there, the T and the non-binary, we've got to fight for their rights too, because they fought for yours.
Well said, Alison. I think there'll be a number of people who are the trans communities who often feel excluded because historically trans community members don't always get their voices heard and often feel very excluded from these discussions. So I think that was incredibly well said. We've heard a lot about what it takes to create safe spaces and what it means to you individually and what it might mean to people who are in leadership roles, the power of being allies, the power of really putting some challenge in, but importantly, keeping this conversation going and turning this conversation into real actions. Is there anything else that's missing from this recipe that you think that we need to keep going so that we can actually turn this into real change for the future?
I think we've covered some of the key areas, and safe spaces is at the centre of that. But I also think, and I think Alison's right, we need to be vigilant in all sorts of areas around this agenda. There is a risk that in looking for quick wins, we don't solve the entrenched issues, whether that's within an organisation or society at large. And there are risks, often in terms of the inclusive and diversity agenda, where tokenism, where you have certain people who are put into roles as a kind of quick fix, and then, we've resolved all issues around inclusion and diversity in the organisation, and that's it, we don't need to do anything more. And I think it's important that when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, it's a journey that doesn't really necessarily have an end point. You're constantly improving. We constantly have to strengthen our approach to this agenda, but the conversation needs to start. And I think what's encouraging about the current context is that people are starting to have these conversations, and I'm seeing it not just in our organisation, but, across the system in West Yorkshire and Harrogate, but also in other organisations too. And you're seeing the development, as a staff network chair, I might be biased, but one of the things I'm seeing is, staff networks are actually, being established across organisations now, which have never, had staff networks before. And that's creating spaces where staff are having these really honest discussions amongst each other and actually influencing the agenda of the organisation and influencing changes. And I think that's the key, isn't it? When we talk about being inclusive and diverse, we've got to challenge and hold those to account within our organisations that they're serious about it and not lose the opportunity. It's really, it makes me angry that, we've had to go through this process again of kind of the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, to actually get this on the agenda. But okay, it's now on the agenda. Let's do something about it now.
Before we kind of come to a close, I'm just going to ask a slightly sort of different question for each of you, and feel free to kind of put your hand up if you want to go first. But if you were going to say something to your younger self, being where you are now and who you are now, what would you say to your younger self? What advice would you give to your younger self? And perhaps to those younger people that are listening to this podcast now? Alison?
I'm probably the oldest here. I'm 56 in September. I know I don't look it, but there you go. I would definitely say to myself that I'm a good person, and that if I love myself, others will love me too. I think when you're young, you believe that the judgment and the opinion of others is more important than your opinion of yourself. That is not the case. And when you love yourself, anything is possible.
Wasim?
It's an interesting question, actually. So I would say, I would tell myself it's going to be okay. I think there are moments in my life where it got really bad, and I'm being open and honest about it. So my parents don't even know about this. Where I really struggled with my sexuality. I really struggled with who I am, and I really didn't want to be gay, if I'm being honest. It just felt like there was too many barriers, too many assumptions made, too many negative connotations that I could never escape that. I would never be accepted, and I had to have a different life. But you know what? I found a partner who I love, and all those struggles that I've gone through have made me who I am today. they're not going to define me. All those negative experiences are not going to be defining who I am today. I'm proud to be gay. I'm proud to be BAME, and there will be times, I'm sure, where there are times where there are moments where I am taken back to a 13 or 14 or 16-year-old self, where I doubted whether it is possible to be your true self. And I'm going to be honest, I'm still on that journey, but slowly I'm getting there. I'm getting to the point where I feel comfortable. And if there was someone around to tell me that yes, you're going to be fine, you're going to be okay, maybe it would have been easier, but there wasn't. And all those little parts, all those little points of tension, all those conversations with myself often make me who I am today. But I'm going to own me now. I'm going to own my identity. I'm going to own the fact that I am gay and an ethnic minority, and I'm going to be proud of myself. So to anyone who's kind of experienced this, regardless of what age you are, there are people out there now who are going to support you, and who will support you. And as Alison said, and I've said before, kind of love kind of overcomes all. Yes, there will be struggles. Yes, you will go through hard conversations, and yes, there might be moments in your life where you don't talk to anyone in your family. But there will be a moment where you will find you will be okay, and you are going to be okay.
Thanks, Wasim. I would say you are more than okay, personally. I think you're amazing. Steve, what would you say to your younger self?
I've got far too much advice to give to my younger self. I would probably say, I agree with what Wasim said. I would probably say it will be okay. I think I'd also probably have said to myself, when people say, well, you've had it much easier than I had it, I'd say just ignore that, because it doesn't matter whether it's easier than it was 25, 30 years ago. Injustice is injustice. And just because it might be a smaller injustice doesn't make it a justice. It's still an injustice. And I think I would probably say to myself to trust in others more than I did. So partly because of some experiences I had when I was younger, I probably didn't talk about the person that I am as much as I should have done, because I was worried about what people would say and think. And I realised I made a load of assumptions about people that weren't right, and I did them a bit of a disservice. And therefore, in doing that, I did myself a disservice. And it's dead easy to say that now. Would I have changed at the time? I have no idea. But yeah, I think so. There's a bit about being brave, and the vast majority of people are good human beings. And so yeah, to give a bit more credit to people that you might not otherwise have done so. And I think, as Wasim said, I went through a phase of wanting to be white when I was growing up, and I've never been more proud to be who I am. I love being from a BAME background. I love being a gay man. Yeah, Alison's love yourself and others will love you too is brilliant advice.
I'd just like to say a genuine, heartfelt thank you to all of you for being so open and honest and so brave. But I do feel genuinely privileged and honoured to kind of guide us through this conversation. And I'm sure many people who are going to be listening to this podcast will also kind of feel really touched about hearing your stories in particular. So once again, massive, massive thank you.
Can you hear me now? You've been listening to a podcast from the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnerships Race Equality Network. Thanks to our guests on this episode, and thank you for listening. Join us again next time, when we'll be joined by more of the diverse talent working to improve health and care for people in West Yorkshire and Harrogate.